Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the 8-Bit Adventures podcast. Here to bring you the latest and greatest gaming news of the past week. I am your host, Sean Hayes. This is episode 312. Excuse me. Sorry for no episode last week. It was just the morning got away from us. The weekend got away from us. So I thought about recording it like later on Saturday, and it was such a long day that I wasn't able to do it. And sadly, there was a bunch of stuff to talk about too. But there's also a bunch of stuff to talk about this week, so we won't be getting into whatever the old news was. So just sorry for no episode last week. And then there was no Stardew Valley stream either, because just everything was getting away from us. Let's see, where was I? All right. So we've got a bunch of stuff this week. Most of the news is dominated by sort of the Nintendo lawsuit. So like everybody picked up that story. But there is some other stuff, and particularly fun, there's some typical games industry nonsense type news. But there's some fun news in there too. So why don't we get right into it? So let's talk about this week's news. All right, so first up, IGN reports that Annapurna Interactive's entire staff, all 25 people, resigned all at once. They just walked out last week, citing disagreements over the direction of the division, chaotic departures, communication breakdowns, and a lack of leadership transparency. And this was kind of also from Bloomberg. So Jason Schreier, who does the reporting for Bloomberg, I believe. This whole situation is so, I don't even, mind-boggling. It is just wild how this all went down. But basically, it was the leadership staff at Annapurna Interactive were trying to spin it out as its own entity. And then either they left or were fired or something by management at Annapurna Pictures, which is a film company that owns this game development or game publishing company. And then because of that, like the murkiness of that, unclear what path the publisher was going to have moving forward. And sort of anonymous interviews with employees like painted kind of a grim picture of the relationship with the leadership at Annapurna Pictures. And it's like just so out there. and it's bad enough for all of your staff to just say we're done. And so there's been a bunch of PR spin because they had open projects with a bunch of developers and like what the status of that is. So it sounds like it's just like the people that were sort of put in charge of the division after firing, quote unquote, I don't want to say previous, because like they were all kind of working in concert despite having the same job descriptions. It's wild. So yeah. And here's the thing is that like the staff that were like, oh, we're still speaking under the condition of anonymity because of fear of like reprisals and stuff from this company. Like to paint a picture of the environment that it was in. And it sounds like they are putting out job postings for all of the positions. I don't know how anyone could look at the situation there and then think, yeah, I want to work there. So I don't know. You know, I just hope that maybe perhaps all of the developers who are working with them maybe find other publishers to work with. You know, like it was like Outer Wilds, Stray, Control 2 was what they were, I think, trying to work on. So, yeah, absolutely wild situation. Next up, here's some fun news. IGN, a lot of IGN news this week, by the way. IGN reports that a modder named katszenBurger has used the dev toolkit to create 2 new maps, a seaside citadel and just a map for sections of Avernus. So this is apparently possible in the dev toolkit that like was inadvertently unlocked with patch 7. So it allows you to go in and build custom maps and presumably custom scenarios and things like that. And they have videos up of like walking around in Avernus. It looks like some of the lighting is either off or they just like put on global lighting or something. But I assume that's something that you can fix. And they noted like in katszenBurger's like discussion of it that it was actually pretty easy to use those tools to create the maps. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the modding community comes up with. Because, yeah. And the fact that it happened a mere couple of weeks after patch 7 dropped is impressive. Like, even if the tools are easy, like, it was done by a single person in a few weeks. So, I'm like, we may see whole campaigns come out of the modding community, which would be great. You know, that was something like you could do in Sword Coast Legends, which is no longer available. But they had like adventure and campaign builders as part of it. I can't remember. I thought Neverwinter had something similar, but next up, Kotaku reports that Ryan Ellis, game director at Firewalk, the developer of Concord, has resigned. The remaining staff at the company are anxious about their future. Some speculate that they might be moved off to other Sony projects. Others fear mass layoffs or full studio closure, given Sony's recent history. But yeah, this is something I don't know if I really talked about Concord at all, but this was another sort of wild situation where it launched and was live for 11 days, and then Sony didn't see the numbers that they wanted and just shut everything down and pulled the store listings and issued refunds to everybody. That's like unprecedented. Like, because it was going to be a live service kit. So I don't know if they just didn't want to keep putting money into it or if they didn't believe that it would generate revenue. But man, this is another piece of the sort of, you know, games industry nonsense. Because yeah, like and as far as I know, like it was a bad launch, but like you could have tried to turn it around or maybe pivot your game into something else or something. Like, I'm sure there were ways to salvage it, but the fact that it was like, yeah, no, this game, like, Sony was like, no, we're absolutely nuking this game from orbit, to the point that we're pulling it. So I guess if it was somehow available in physical format, which I don't know, but if you were able to get a physical copy somehow, that might be worth some money. I don't think it would be if it's like a games of service type model. So, but yeah, so hopefully, either Sony just gives the studio something new to work on, and everybody gets to keep their job, or I don't know. It's such a weird situation. The hope obviously is that Sony doesn't just close the studio and put all those people out of it, and put like 150 people out of work. But it's the thing, they've let go 900 or so people so far this year. So, so I get best of luck to the folks at Firewalk. Well, and then Ellis made a statement of like that, basically coming up with solutions for the studio and a path forward and everything. And people are like, but if he's gone, like, I don't put much faith into that statement. So, and I don't blame them for not having faith in that statement. So yeah. Polygon reports that pre-orders are now open for Daggerheart, Darrington Press's TTRPG. So I did a little bit of the play test to see some of the game systems, but I didn't see much of it. I know that they have, was it like the hope and fear dice mechanic? So it's like you roll 2 dice when you do everything, and like the higher one, and like whether you succeed or fail, like the higher one informs kind of the tone of the action you take. So I know that there's like a standard edition and a limited collector's edition bundle. Because I remember seeing the price of the collector's edition was like $150. So I don't know if that includes 3 books. But yeah. So that's just a quick piece of news for folks who are maybe looking for an alternative to Dungeons and Dragons. I know it's being billed as being more accessible than D&D. But I don't know how true that is. And as far as like if you're looking for it to be less complex, I don't know if it mechanically is less complex than Dungeons and Dragons. Like I think it might be less tactical. It's certainly focusing more on narrative, but I think it's still got maybe roughly the same level of math involved. So, all right, big story this week. Basically every gaming news site out there is reported on the fact that Nintendo and the Pokemon Company International have filed a lawsuit against Palworld developer PocketPair. Now, notably, everyone kind of expected a lawsuit for copyright infringement or trademark infringement due to the character designs. It looks like that they've instead gone with patent infringement, and it's been filed in Japan. I believe in Tokyo specifically. So, a couple things to note about this. One is that we don't know what patents were infringed. There is some speculation about it being like Pokeball type mechanics in a 3D environment. That is speculation because we don't know. And the other thing, because it was filed in Japan, and any speculation with the basis of how patent law and IP law works in the US does not apply. So I am certainly not any sort of expert on Japanese law, especially like corporate IP law. So what I have seen is a track record of Nintendo not doing this. So when they do, it everyone usually takes notice. And to be clear, when I say not doing this, I mean patent infringement suits, as opposed to, sort of DMCA takedowns, which might come from a regional office. And I guess because they typically don't do this, I think the last time they did was cited as 2016. And it was against somebody that was doing patent troll type stuff. That the community over in Japan looks much more favorably upon it than, everyone that's losing their minds in the US over, big bad Nintendo picking on PocketPair. So here's the thing. I am not surprised. I'm not surprised that some sort of suit was filed. And PocketPair, it seems shocked, which I think is just PR spin. I cannot imagine that they, like, I don't know in what world you could be shocked in which, because of the marketing campaign that you did and how close of, like, it's almost like a parody game that just happens to be more about base building and crafting and survival than, your typical monster catching game. Like, when you skirt that close to, trademark and copyright infringement, which, to be clear, I think they're on the safe side of that as far as like their creature designs and stuff. I think it's a deliberate, like, it might be like the monster designs are different enough that I think they're safe. However, I think when they are made intentionally that close, is you are making a statement. And the fact that, their opening marketing campaign was basically like Pokemon with guns. And when the discourse surrounding the game is it's a Pokemon clone, I think, you cannot be surprised that some sort of suit was coming. And that it was Nintendo and the Pokemon Company were just looking for probably the most surefire way to file a suit and then win it. So we'll have to see how this goes, folks. I'm sure, despite the fact that it's a suit that's not happening in the US, that the games industry will be following it very closely. It's also, from what I understand, the sort of corporate situation in Japan is that, like, a lot of these big developers and publishers kind of exist in like a very balanced environment of, like, there's almost like a gentleman's agreement over what's okay and what's not. and in terms of, mechanics and what you can get in patents and what you can get away with and everything. And so it's very unusual for something to disrupt that ecosystem. So yeah, definitely a wild situation with this. We'll see how things turn out. There is, it's all speculation at this point. But I guess a lot of the speculation is that this will probably be a win for Nintendo and the Pokemon Company. And then what they're looking for is, I'm not sure if they're looking to kind of drain PocketPair of resources until it just, folds. Or if they're just looking for PocketPair to just change some of the mechanics in the game to make it more different. I think that is probably the most likely outcome. And again, no legal expertise whatsoever. But my guess would be that it would be satisfactory. It might be like some sort of damages plus, I don't think it's I don't think it's a case where they're going to force PocketPair to delist the game. I don't think that's the case. It was also everybody speculating that Sony and Microsoft are going to jump into the fray and fight this as well. I don't think they will. Unless, and I meant to look this up. I don't know if it's the case. Unless Microsoft and Sony have some sort of ownership stake in PocketPair, I don't think they get involved. I really don't. And I think people are overstating how important, quote unquote, of a franchise Palworld is to those platforms. Because it's not a franchise. Like it's a singular game. And it's something where it was disruptive enough that Nintendo and Pokemon are taking notice of it. But to think that it is on the same level as a global franchise as Pokemon is a bad take. So, no, I don't think, and and if I turn out to be wrong, I will gladly admit it. But I don't think this is a case where everybody and their mother jumps in to help PocketPair win this suit. I don't. Unless they're bleeding resources and they offer themselves up for sale. But also, this was a studio that basically, and maybe I'll catch heat for this from fans of Palworld. From what I understand, this was a studio that basically just churned out low effort games and then just happened to get lucky with the Palworld concept. Like, they just make games that are, I don't want to say rip off, but like, because that implies a negative connotation. And it's not what they did with Palworld. I don't think. I think there is enough of a novel concept in there, but it's basically an open world Pokemon game. Like it's if you were to combine, Minecraft and Pokemon a little bit, or well, I say that it's Pokemon in the survival genre. Like that's what it is. Like it's just that you combined like the genre mechanics of every survival game out there, because you've got base building, farming, collecting resources for crafting, and then you happen to combine it with monster catching and monster abilities and stuff. It's something where, like, if Pokemon had decided to go that route with a survival game, I think it would look very close, with the exception of the guns. Like, and I think had the marketing not been so antagonistic, I don't think this would have blown up into the thing that it was. And maybe if the designs were different. Because, like, Temtem existed. Like, Temtem still exists. But it's, it is it's a more traditional sort of monster battling game. And honestly, it had a lot of systems that made it more interesting than Pokemon. So, yeah, we'll have to see how this one shakes out, folks. Finally, our last bit of news. Gamesindustry.biz reports that Square Enix has confirmed sales of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy XVI did not meet expectations. Now, there's probably two things at work here. One, I think, is perhaps their sales expectations were too aggressive, because that's always a thing. Since they still posted, like, really big profits. So it certainly might be one of those, like, well, we knew it was going to sell, all of these units and be a successful game launch. But we expected it to be a more successful game launch, and therefore it failed. Well, at the same time, I do think, in the case of Final Fantasy XVI, I think moving that, and I think this was also the case with 15, but moving it toward that sort of action and making it an action RPG, might have hurt the game's popularity. Maybe. And I remember watching some footage. And I don't know. I remember when 16 launched, like, it just was not very popular compared to previous launches. I also don't know if there's just, like, Final Fantasy fatigue at this point. And if people were more excited for the FF7 remake series than they were for, like, a new game. It's just weird because, like, Square Enix is killing it with Final Fantasy 14. So that I don't know. And then FF7 Rebirth, I do know the reaction to it was definitely more muted than it was from FF7 Remake. It seems like they just stuffed Rebirth with, like, a lot of filler content to pad the game's length out, which, I guess you could argue for Remake as well, but like with a lot of side quests and everything. But it feels like they forced a lot of grinding side quest type elements into the main story progression. And that's kind of not great. So now it sort of begs the question of, like, how long is this series going to be then? Because I thought it was going to be a trilogy. So, but, from what I've seen of Rebirth, it seems like you don't get very far. Like, in between, leaving Midgar to the end of Rebirth. Which I think is, like, I know you do Nibelheim, but yeah. So I don't know. I don't know. I think it's a combination of both. Like, I think they were still pretty successful, and it might have been overly ambitious expectations. But at the same time, there is something there of, like, hey, maybe don't put your games full of filler. So, or at least if you're going to do that, then be honest about it. Because to say, like, oh, it's a 60-hour, like, if you go in and say, like, this is a 60-hour game, And then it turns out the reason why it's 60 hours is you put 20 hours of filler content that you have to go through. It's a little disingenuous. So, all right. Well, that is going to wrap up the episode for this week. Thank you all for joining me. I apologize for the interruptions. Hopefully I'll be able to fix those in post for audio listeners. If you would like to see more content from 8-Bit Adventures, be sure to check out our website, 8-bitadventures.com. Over there you can find, so I have a webcomic series that I've done. It's still kind of on hiatus at the moment as I try and sort of get back into equilibrium with my life. But also like back episodes of the podcast and episodes of other podcasts. If you would like to help support that content, the best way to do so is to become a patron over at patreon.com/8bitadventures. Patrons can support for as little as $1 a month and get all sorts of benefits. So big shout out and thank you to all of my current patrons. Thank you for your continued support. And finally, our opening theme is One Up by Professor Shy Guy. You can find his work over at professorshyguy.bandcamp.com. So I'm going to head on out. Hope you all have a great weekend and a great week. We'll see you next week. Or no, I will not see you next. There will be no episode next week. It is my anniversary. So we will be traveling. So no show next week. But we will return the following week. So hope everyone has fun. We'll see you next time. And as always, have fun, happy gaming, and enjoy your pie cake.